All right. Awesome. All right. So everybody probably presumably saw the study questions. You feel free to be able to answer them or not. I don't know if I'm going to get to them directly, but those are just things that I thought would be helpful for you to focus your thoughts on a little bit while dealing with this text. Let's see here. So we've been looking at the first thing that the philosopher as such is authorized to pronounce upon, and that is the principle of non-contradiction. The philosopher as such being that state of mind that thinks being as being. And one of the study questions, and maybe just in case anybody has any answers or anything like that, Aristotle introduces this idea of being qua being, or being as being, and he distinguishes it from kinds of knowledge like mathematical knowledge and knowledge of natural things, because these aren't knowledge of being as being, but rather being as a moving thing, or being as a quantity or as a number. And I was just kind of curious if you had any thoughts actually about how you would distinguish between what we might call a being, like a table, or even more appropriately, a body of knowledge, and being qua being. So I'm going to wait for the next half hour until somebody answers.
Oh, what Heidegger said.
Okay. Yeah, the being of beings, right? The being of beings. That almost sounds like being qua being, but he insists it's quite different.
Yeah, I was just being a little facetious. But anyway. But the distinction between beings versus being qua being is still relevant, right? Do you maybe take a different?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So it's not the instance of any particular being, but what it is to. And it's not the. I'm about to go down articulate something as if it were the foundation. What are the conditions for the possibility of being or something? But it's not that either, really. It's not the conditions for things, but. But it's he says that every one of the other sciences chooses some genus to work on. Once you've chosen the genus, you're sort of out of being qua being and into a particular type of being. And it would be the thing of underlying all that kind of stuff.
Good. Is that map on to everybody else's thinking on this, or just did you have other takes on it? This is not a question about Aristotle exegesis, because he hasn't told us anything about it. It's only the question of how you, in your own mind, draw the distinction between, like, the world has lots of beings, and the world itself is, and how is that distinct from being as being?
Hey, Michael, this is Clark. Can you hear me?
Clark. Yeah.
Loud
and clear.
I had to run out just to be able to say this, but yeah, I enjoyed your study questions, and that first one, seemed possible for me to speculate an answer on.
Excellent.
But so and this is just what I've kind of picked up being engaged with you guys. But being qua being to me means being in the sense of being, right? That's the qua is, I translate in the sense of. So being qua being, that is being in the sense of being, is what existence is in the sense of what is found in common between all beings said to exist. And when I wrote that down, I'm going, geez, that's weird. But I think it does make sense. It's kind of Aristotelian in that it's so oblique and kind of weird. But I'm on to say it again. Being qua being is what existence is in the sense of what is found in common between all beings said to exist. So that's being qua being. And then being is really simplistic, just off the top of my head. A being is what a specific individual is that instantiates existence, as well as all the additional attributes making up that individual. So in other words, a being is something more than just existence itself, because it has to be. That would be being qua being. But a being is something that has accidents and other attributes as a part of its existence. So that's it. Pretty simple.
Awesome. Thank you. Peter, you understand?
Yeah, I just want to quibble with the word existence, because that might rule out mathematical objects, which might also have being.
True. I don't understand that, though. I don't know how number 2 has being, other than just as a concept. So,
well, both number 1 and number 2 have being.
Well, it has some. I just think there's. I don't know. It seems like a conflation of some sort. But I understand that's a tradition around that. I just doesn't make sense to me yet.
Right.
Check.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, we can quibble or not. Aristotle hasn't given us very much. There's I would actually just say that yours is very close actually to the Stoic thought, and that being is what all beings have in common, and so what they all have in common is this genus being, which they called something. Everything that has in common that it's something, and it's not nothing. And so, and the Stoics understood this to be contrary to Aristotle. And so that's interesting. I'm not saying that you're wrong or right. I'm saying that you're on a path that is well-trodden, and gave rise to real disputes in late antiquity. And when we talk a little bit about whether Aristotle thinks that being is a genus, and his answer is no, and so therefore it's not something that's common to everything that exists, right? Then that will make some progress in understanding what he is bringing out as being qua being. And then maybe because you've already got this, the basic Stoic concept of being down, right? Maybe you be in a better position to see what its weakness is over against the Aristotelian concept. So I'm not saying there's wrong. I'm saying it's a very has a great pedigree in the history of philosophy, but it's interesting that Aristotle doesn't go there, and so we kind of have to dig into that a little bit. Sandy, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm also interested in this idea. I just want to, I was going to ask you to repeat it, but let me just say, so from what I understood from what you just said, so this commonality of being, this is a Stoic idea.
Yes.
And it's contrary, and it's basically the opposite of what Aristotle is saying, or it's not.
Yeah.
It's opposed to Aristotle's understanding of being.
Yes, I think so. I mean, we can express it this way. This is the opposition. For the Stoics, being is a genus, and it's what everything that is has in common. For Aristotle, being is not a genus.
It's not a genus. And is that maybe because we don't get as many distinctions when there's too much of a focus on the commonality? It's kind of like a flattening? Yeah,
I think that's correct. I don't think that's Aristotle's reasonings, but I think it's a consequence of.
Oh, okay. So that's not
right.
Aristotle's reasoning, but that would be a consequence
Right.
Okay. All right. I was just wanted to make sure I understood. Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Any other contributions to this question of being qua being?
So for the Stoics, accidents would have being, right?
Yeah.
But for Aristotle, they don't. Correct?
Well, he's not. No, he's not quite saying that. He says that they're almost nothing, right? In gamma 7 or no, gamma 7 or 8. He says Plato is right to treat them as almost nothing. Did I fuck with your point there?
No. That's fine. I was, but yeah, the almost nothing is interesting, which is it almost sounds like there's something between being and nothing there.
Yeah. I mean, I just globally gesture to the whole idea that, the only way to think beyond Parmenides is to think that there are ways in which nothing is, because that's exactly what Parmenides forbade, right? Being is and not being is not, period. And we saw, and we are actually thematized this a little bit in Aristotle's concept of change, where lack as a way of non-being is essential to thinking the concept of change. Right? So we see in lack, we see one of those modalities of non-being, and coincidence is one of those modalities of non-being that is kind of is and is not. And that's actually going to get super interesting in the Epsilon 3, which took me forever to figure out. So I hope we get there.
Yeah, I was going to bring up becoming too, because it seems like becoming involves that vague area in between that's going to get fleshed out, because something that is becoming has to be able to both be and not be in different respects.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. And yeah, I agree. I mean, we just have to always, becoming and change. These are synonymous terms at the level that we're discussing these issues. And so whether we're talking about becoming or change, we're talking about lack, we're talking about form, and we're talking about matter in a very specific configuration. And in that configuration, we can understand that something is passing away while something else becomes, while something else is the becoming of that something else. And so you have these different modalities of being and non-being in the changing thing. And you have to think all of that together. Otherwise, you don't get in view a thing that changes. All you get are different differences, right? The bud is different from the blossom, but they're not the same thing. They're just different. But to get the idea that the bud blossoms, we need lack, form, and matter in order to understand how it's the bud itself that blossoms.
I was going to add one more thing, which is that if being were a genus, it would be one genus among others. I have a dog.
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
Right.
So it sort of flattens the levels, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what Sandy said, right? And this is very horizontal thinking, right? Or accidentally horizontal, because nobody intends to be horizontal, I don't think, when they think. One thing that we've done, and it took many months to do, but I caught a glimmer of understanding in some members here, and I'm very excited about that, right? That this whole account transfer thing, this whole idea that that there's a necessary relationship between Socrates and being human, and there's a strange relationship between Socrates and being pale, because Socrates if he's human, is both an animal in the same sense as an ox is, and rational in the same sense as any other rational being is. So he gets those higher order universal concepts, but he's also pale. He is pale. And so he has a color, but he is not color the way he is animal. He only has the color, but just because he is pale doesn't mean that the universal color is attributable to him. So we have this weird asymmetry and this weird structure of substance and accidents, universal in particular, that that holds for all things. And I forgot why I went down that path, but I just wanted to remind us that, that we've kind of got this hard won structure. Shit, I forgot how to connect it up with what we were talking about before. I apologize, but let that just be a reminder of one of the accomplishments, right? This structure that we started out with in the categories, that we kind of lost sight of, has re-entered into our purview as being something that's not just a set of Aristotelian opinions, but is the way in which he accounts for the strange fact that the is of Socrates is pale is a different is than the is of Socrates is human. These are two different link-ups. In the one, the universal is attributable to him, right? He is rational, but in the other, it's not attributable to him. He's not a color. And this weird asymmetry is the root and branch of what Aristotle is working on, and it radiates, or it permeates all these thoughts about truth and non-contradiction and all the rest of it. So I guess we'll get there, but Tyler, that was all response to you. Do you want to add something to it?
No, I think I'm good with that.
All right.
I think we should probably move through the text.
All right. That is always the right answer. All right. So Gamma 7. One of the things that I've been wanting to, or I have been pointing out, and I've been kind of focusing on here, is how we think about truth and falsity has ramifications for what things can be, and that's strange. And Aristotle keeps bringing that out by his reference to rest and change. If you think things in a certain way, change is impossible. If you think things in a certain way, everything changes and falsehood or truth is impossible. So there are at the most fundamental level, the level of being qua being, whatever that is, there is this interpenetration of what we think and the nature of the things we think about, namely spatiotemporal objects, things changing, etc. And so that was, I think, Clark made this great contribution last time, and in seeing the Parmenidean context of Aristotle's point, which was in Gamma 5, that if it is the case that everything is both what it is and not what it is, which is to say, it is everything that we say about something is true, then change becomes impossible, because since everything is already everything, there is no room for it to become something. There is no form it can gain, since it already is everything. So this is one of those really interesting connections between how we think about truth and what follows for what things can be as a consequence of that thought. And so we see he's doing it here a little bit in a very, very difficult passage, but let's just tackle it and see what we can make of it. So if I could get a reader to just read the beginning of the first two paragraphs of Gamma 7. Here he gives us, the classic definition of truth that's repeated through the ages, and so it's good to know by heart. And then he's going to give an argument about his assertion here. Anybody be willing to read? Let me see, just you can read from this.
I'll read, just, where are we?
Can you see the screen? Or if you prefer reading your book, it's just on Reeve, page 65, which is and the beginning of Gamma 7.
Gamma 7. Okay, my book is kind of caught up in the iPad. Okay. No, I'll just read from the screen. Okay. But then neither is it possible for there to be anything in the middle between contradictories, but it is necessary either to affirm or to deny one thing, whatever it may be of one thing. This will be clear if we first define what truth is and what falsehood is. For to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false, whereas to say of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not, is true. So he who says of anything that it is or that it is not will say either what is true or what is false. But it is said that neither what is nor what, God, this is hard. Okay. But it is said that neither what is nor what is not either is not or is. I'm sorry, I didn't read that very well, but.
Oh, that's perfect.
It's there's so many is happening there. It's really hard to get ahead of it.
Full of being, right. So do you mind hitting the next paragraph too, please?
Oh, okay, yeah, no problem. Further, what is in the middle between the contradictories will be so either in the way in which gray is between black and white, or in the way in which what is neither a human nor a horse is between the two. Well, if it is in the latter way, what is in the middle could not change into either of the extremes, for a thing changes from not good to good or from good to not good. But in fact, it evidently always does do this, for there is no change except to opposites or things in the middle. On the other hand, if it is in the middle, in the former way, then in this way too, there would be some sort of coming to be, that is a change to white, but not a change, but not a change from not white. In fact, though, this is never seen. Is there more, or is that where it stops?
Let's stop there. I think that's enough to chew on.
Okay.
All right, so he opens things up by saying it's neither possible for there to be anything in the middle between contradictories. Now, okay, but it's necessary either to affirm or to deny one thing of one thing. All right, so keeping that in mind. Now, this is tricky, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with it, but in change, he was talking about contraries, and now he's talking about contradictories, and I'm not sure how important that difference is, but I'm going to pretend it's not very important, and that could get me in hot water here, but let's just run with it and see what happens. Right, Tyler?
Yeah, my understanding that is, if we're talking about contradictories, we're going to be focused on being or not being one kind of thing. Whereas contraries, something can be neither of the two options.
Right, and that's the proper definition, right? But I guess what I want to do is he is giving us examples of changing from not white to white, or a thing from good to not good, and then these are very similar to the kinds of examples he was giving us when he was talking about change in the physics.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just gonna pretend it's all the same and see what it gets us, right? So why can we not use, or why is there no middle between contradictories, or why is there the law of the excluded middle? And what he gives us is arguments from change. So again, the epistemic semantic level has consequences for the ontological level. The ontological level has consequences for the semantic epistemic level. These interpenetrate. And that's how his argumentation is always working here. And I just want you to note that. It's not that because the world is structured in a certain way, and all we have to do is describe it, that we have true sentences or false sentences, but rather thinking about what must be the case in order for a sentence to be true is thinking about what things are, and not just thinking about how to form a true judgment by, S is P or Socrates is white, which you need grammatical rules to do that. So, okay, enough. So what's he arguing here? So we've got two kinds of middles that he's presenting. One, the gray between black and white, right? And then this other strange one, right? To say that something is neither a human nor a horse, right? Has given us two extremes and leaving everything but human and horse in the middle between these two extremes. Okay, so these are two different kinds of middle. And therefore they have two different kinds of consequences for whether change could be possible if there were a middle. Peter.
Right. So roughly, I think, at least I took the two examples to be the possibilities of one is contradictory. So horse and animal, or man and horse, or whatever, is a contradictories. And the gray and white, black and white and gray are the contraries. If something could be, if something is within the same genus, like a color, gray, black and white, then we have that case. It would be possible for things to change, but he has this rule. He slips a contradictory into that explanation at the very end, because he says, on the other hand, if it is in the middle in the former way, i.e. the gray and black white, then in this way too, there would be some sort of coming to be that is a change to white, but not a change from not white, not white being the contradictory. And I think that's getting at the Parmenidean. You can't have the Parmenidean popping into existence and popping out of existence, because that doesn't explain anything.
Right.
So that way is going to come to grief. And the other thing, what is between a man and an ox or an animal or whatever, a frog? That seems to be, there's nothing that relates them. There could be no changing between the two, because there's no genus there's no accidental genus, I guess. Maybe that's what it is, because both of those are animals, right? The man and the ox are animal. Is that horse? Sorry, it's a horse, I guess. Anyway.
Yeah.
Not that changes anything, but I kind of lost my train of thought, but
it's a tough one, yeah, because obviously human and horse are members of the same genus, but they're not necessarily extremes in that genus, right? So it's a weird example. So I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds on this.
Well, I think with human and horse, right, they're each a kind of substance that would be destroyed in the transition. So the human can't be a horse and remain human, and vice versa.
Well, one is a substantial change and one's an accidental change.
Yes.
Well, okay, so but is that what he says? I mean, I think that's super interesting, and I'm glad you brought it up because I didn't think about that. But maybe I didn't think about it because I was focused on what he said.
Well, I don't think that's the main point, but it is involved there. But yeah, I think the main point is that the one way of changing is the kind of change where there is no underlying substance, which is the change where things pop in and out of existence, which just say there's nothing that could stay the same across the change.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we go from simply is X to is not X without an underlying subject to be one or the other, it's not a change of one thing into something else. It's just one thing, then something else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also that context that you have to say, first of all, the argument is assume the principle of excluded middle does not hold.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that leave you?
Right.
Because then it says, if it is in the latter way, what is in the middle could not change into either of the extremes. On the other hand, if it is in the middle, in the former way, the black-white one, then in this way, there would be some sort of coming to be that is a change to white. So you are moving towards white, but not a change from not white.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the contradictory. That's too broad of a from. Because it could be the opposite of the middle class is also not white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that you could change from and go towards anything, because change was always within a genus, within contraries, right? Amongst
Right.
contraries with
Right.
with the underlying substance.
Which is kind of to say, how does something that's already sort of white change to be or something, yeah, sort of white become white
If it's
as
already
if it's
white.
not already partly white.
Right. So the idea is this, maybe becoming whiter, right? But I guess you could.
A whiter shade of pale.
Yeah, exactly. So can we distill this into something more or less easy? So that which is neither a human nor a horse is everything except a human and a horse, right? Everything. And what is the middle, which is everything, could not change, okay, into either of the extremes, because everything is not the contrary opposite of horse, and everything is not the contrary opposite of human. So since it's not the contrary opposite of human or horse, it can't become human or horse, and therefore it cannot could not change into either of the extremes. But in fact, change evidently always does this. Okay, so that's where he comes out with this, it trumps with his argument, and that's what we need to understand a little bit more.
And there's also no opposite of an individual substance. That doesn't make sense. There's
Right.
no contrary to a substance. So there's no
Right.
contrary to an individual horse or thing or everything that is not either one of those two.
Right.
All three of those, none of those have opposites.
Right. And there's only change where there's opposite. Right. And that's what he means. In fact, evidently, it always does do this, right? Change from not good to good, or from good to not good. Change is always, right, from not bronze as not statue to bronze as statue, from a pile of materials that is potentially a house to the same pile of materials arranged as a house. Wasn't a house, it is a house, right? Change is always this opposition. So I'm not quite sure how
Is that
much.
because,
Go
because
ahead.
there's no form that would allow the change, so to speak, from everything to some particular thing? Which would have to be the case if PAM did not hold.
Maybe I don't quite understand it. I mean, I understand the only opposite to everything is nothing, and nothing comes from nothing. That's one of our principles, right? Nothing comes from nothing, and so everything cannot be a cause of change, and everything cannot be involved in change, because that would imply that that nothingness is productive, or that things come from nothing.
Yeah, but if the assumption, if there's a reductio and you've thrown out PEM, you probably can't say that there's nothing is an opposite of, I mean, everything's an opposite of everything. And nothing,
Right.
You're already lost.
I mean, part of what the difficulty is even to get at, what does he even mean by the principle of excluded middle here?
Right? He has a very awkward phrasing of it.
Yeah. So I mean, we're using that phrase, principle of excluded middle, and he doesn't, right? He says there's no middle between contradictories. So, I mean, which is, fundamentally to say, that, as he says at the very beginning, right, that to say of something that it is, to say of it that it is, or something that's not, to say that it's not, is to say that it's true. And the opposite, to say of something that's is that it's not, is false, right? So we can do all of that.
I took the last sentence of that paragraph to be also a statement of somebody, what somebody denies when, so the very top of the next page.
Yeah.
First sentence of the next page, which we can't see right now. Yeah, but it is said that neither what is nor what is not either is not or is. I think that's an awkward statement of the denial of the principle.
Yeah, so the principle of non-contradiction, you can think of this, if you violate that, then you say that everything is what it is and also what it's not. And the principle of excluded middle is to say everything is neither what it is nor what it's not.
Well, the principle
Right.
of excluded middle says either it is a something or it's not a something. There's nothing in between.
Right, but
the denial of that is the awkward one, which he says up in that first line on that page.
Right. Just if you think of it, to be or not to be as the extremes, then the principle of excluded, the denial of the principle of excluded middle would say it's neither is nor it isn't.
Principle of excluded middle allows zombies, roughly.
Yeah. So,
and that's what he gets. Yeah, go ahead.
If we throw out the principle of non-contradiction, everything is. We throw out principle of excluded middle, everything is not. And change is impossible in either case.
That is very pithy, and I like it. That boils it down, I think, to exactly the right point. And I guess our task is to comprehend that. You want to, to the extent you can, so you want to say it again?
So yeah, so if we throw out the principle of non-contradiction, then everything is. Everything that is, and everything that is not is. If we throw out, and in that case, yeah, you've got everything is. If everything is, there's nothing that it lacks for it to change into.
Right.
Everything is everything already.
Exactly.
Well, you said principle of contradiction, non-contradiction. Did you mean that or excluded middle? Because that's different.
I'm moving into the excluded middle, which is if we throw out the excluded middle, everything is not, because nothing can fully be.
So to say of anything, to say something of anything is to say that it neither is what it is, nor is it not what it's not. Yeah.
And this is getting at that difference between Heraclitus and was it Anax? So
Anaxagoras, exactly.
Anaxagoras, yeah.
Exactly. So I hope you feel that this argument is like taking place at that most foundational level of engaging with Parmenides and Parmenidean logic and the logic of being, to bring two things that we often think are two separate things. Being's one thing and logic is another, but we're doing the logic of being here. And so the one thing that Aristotle says that's easy to understand is a little bit later in the text, hopefully I can find it so we can read it, is basically, it can't be the case that nothing changes, and it can't be the case that everything changes. And the problem is if you deny the principle of non-contradiction, you're committed to the idea that nothing changes. And if you deny the principle of excluded middle, you're committed to the idea that everything changes. And since neither of these allow any explanation of anything, they entail the destruction of all rational discourse. So there's nothing to be said about anything. So one thing I think is worth noticing, and this is the reason why we took the detour through the physics, is how much of the metaphysics is thinking about, at the level of truth and the level of being, what must be the case if change is to be possible. Change is not possible if everything changes. Change is not possible if nothing changes. Change is only possible if there's a mixture of change and an unchangingness. There must be change, there must be the unchanging in order for change to even be possible. Right. I guess I've made that point often enough, but I guess at a meta level, I'm saying how much of the metaphysics is thinking about what was done in the physics and how that project can be secured at this meta level. Every physics must speak. Every physics must speak about something, but physics can't investigate the conditions of true and false speech. And that's what we're doing in metaphysics gamma. And, and that's why the argumentation is always, not always, but often hooking up with questions of physics. Can things change if we assume the denial of the principle of non-contradiction? Can things change if we assume the denial of the principle of excluded middle? Right. So what we're doing here is we're carving out this domain that is the meta domain of any science, because no natural science or no specific science like mathematics or grammar or music, study of music, can clarify how its discourse or how its speech must be structured to preserve the being of what it wants to talk about: music, math, change. And here we're getting at the specific provenance of the philosopher. And we're getting at the specific nature of being qua being. And our first taste of being qua being are questions about truth. So that's the main point I wanted to make in Gamma 7. And I really appreciate the conversation, because it allowed me to make it better than I could make it on my own piece of paper. So I appreciate that. But if anybody wants to talk about anything else that happens in that happened in Gamma 7 before we move on, now's the time to do it. And Tyler's the first person with a hand raised.
I was just going to note that the reason that the subdisciplines or particular sciences can't deal with the question of being and change and becoming and things like that is that they had to move away from what defines them as a subdiscipline, right? So if the musician concerns himself with being qua being, he's not being a musician because it's not about music anymore.
Right.
So I just wanted to just throw that quick note in there, just because
Nope.
we sort of brushed past.
That's exactly right, and that's why there's no physics of true or false speech. It's outside the domain of the so-called universal science, not quite so universal as people like to think. Awesome. Any other thoughts about this? This fundamental idea that we have these logical principles, right? That I think today are kind of not thought to be very, very interesting, because I don't think that people recognize the way in which there are ontological, or there are ontological implications for denying these principles. I think they're usually taught as like being, methodologically clean and not fucking up your science by introducing contradictions, something like that. But the point is the real point is that you end up talking about things of a different nature than your science can study. And so you're outside of your science, pretending to be inside of your science when these principles are violated. And so these principles are not just principles of methodological principles to be good scientists, but they're the principles of the nature of the kind of thing that your science, the genus. They maintain the integrity of the genus. They maintain the identity of that which your science is about. And that's a very tricky thing, right? Because, okay, never mind. Never mind. It's a tricky thing. And I think everybody can see how it might be, because what a science is fundamentally about, let's say, is not perceptible. The structure of grammar isn't perceptible as such, but it is an understanding of the way in which a language functions, and then we can show that understanding in perceptions of sound and morphemes and phonemes and all the rest of it. But those are all just examples of what it is we study. They're not the actual things that we study. And so, since we don't have perceptions to anchor our thoughts in the genus of anything, we need our thought to create its own guide, handrails to guide it, so that it doesn't start thinking about something that's not inside that genus or not inside that science. And that inevitably happens if and when we allow contradictions and that which is in between contradictories to find passage into our thought. Okay, I did kind of want to get into limitlessness, but we'll just save limitlessness for next semester. All right. So the thing that I wanted to get at in Gamma 8 is our statements that blow themselves up. So yeah. Does anybody actually want to say anything? I did give it a study question, the difference between Heraclitus and Anaxagoras, and we've already kind of spelled it out a little bit. But if anybody wants to take a stab just to clarify their own thoughts, or to kind of get the quintessence of the conversation thus far clear in their own head, if anybody would like to take a stab at that passage, let me scroll down to it, about Heraclitus and Anaxagoras. And I think it's really, really important to do this, just because, Heraclitus is always such a fashionable figure, and it seems like in modernity, everybody loves flux. So it's important to understand the limits of validity, or the limits of scope of Heraclitus, because he's just he's so seductive.
Didn't realize philosophers are so sexy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. The philosopher's a paradox, it's, always makes you sound so deep. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get cynical on y'all right now. I just want to hear if anybody would mind spelling out what Aristotle writes in this paragraph. I'll read it out loud, and then I'll wait a half hour for anybody to jump in and say something about it. It seems, though, that whereas Heraclitus's argument, which says that everything is and is not, makes everything true, that of Anaxagoras, that there is something in the middle of contradictories, makes everything false. For when things are mixed, the mixture is neither good nor not good, so there's nothing true to say.
I thought Tyler's earlier summary was pretty cogent, but I'm not going to attempt to out Tyler and repeat it.
No, but I mean, it was Tyler's was so spot on that I thought other people should practice it. Practice saying it. And if not,
I wasn't paying attention.
Okay, well, luckily this is being recorded so we can go back. But if nobody dares, we'll have Tyler restate it. No, that I just gave you guys an out. Tyler, don't say a word until the very last second. Sandy.
Did I miss something? Because there's a relationship here between being and good that is not really clear to me. I mean, obviously, just in a kind of a base value way, I don't really see it as a problem, but I'm just curious how Aristotle makes that connection.
Yeah, my only answer is that this is the first time he started using good as an example in this book of the metaphysics. So I'm not, I don't know why it's all of a sudden coming up, but it seems to be, he seems to be working with it on the same level as good, not good, white, not white. I don't think he's giving us anything.
Okay, so it's
interesting.
It's kind of an example then.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to think of good like the good or the concept of the good. I'm just supposed to. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
If nobody else wants to stab, I'll make a stab at
I
it.
appreciate it. Thank you.
So in the case of Heraclitus, where everything is and is not, if we go back to what Aristotle's definition of the truth was, the truth is that which is, and that which is not, is not.
Mm-hmm.
So if everything both is and is not, everything is both true and false. So everything is, so it's a mess on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes everything true, at least something. On the Anaxagoras' side, if you deny the principle of the excluded middle, then you find a position which is neither true nor false.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure exactly why that's everything. I mean, everything could be not true.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that makes it not false. But by the same argument, everything's not false, so it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure why it's only false. I'm not.
Good. Good. That's why I wanted to hit this. I mean, I don't necessarily have anything helpful to say about that. I just wanted to see what we can make of it.
Well, it's false that it is, and it's false that it is not.
Mm-hmm. I think that's.
But fair. You can flip false and true in that sentence, right?
But the idea is that every statement every true statement is neither true nor false, and every false statement is neither true nor false. And then every one of these statements about it neither being true nor false is neither true nor false, right? And I think that's what he's getting at. But Tyler, do you see it differently?
Well,
No,
my question is, it's a symmetric thing. So why is the false preferred?
I think it's because you can never say anything true on this account, which is to say, so even though there's also a sense in which you can never say anything is false, but the problem is if you were to say anything is false, that would be to say something true about it.
Right.
What I
So
don't understand is why, if you just swap true and false in the sentence you just said, is not also hold.
I think we might have to bring in another principle, because, but yeah, no, I see what you're saying. For some
That's
reason,
pretty weird. You see my words?
Oh, yes. I have I've forgotten that weird.
I mean, if it's worth, I mean, Peter, does Reeves' little comment here clarify your question on page 357? He says, because to say of A that it is neither B nor not B is to say something false where A is B and whereas A is not B.
Yeah, let me just, yeah, I looked at this a couple of days ago and I had it. I've lost it since then, so I will go back and read it. Yeah, but
It happens to me all the time.
Was very helpful, as I
Mhm.
recall.
Mm-hmm. So if A is B, to say it's neither A or B is false. And if A is not B, to say it's neither A or B is also false. And,
Well,
and that holds of everything.
I think
Listen,
what Peter is
no-
adding is that to say that those are false would also be not true. On its own suppositions, anyway. But I'm not sure if I'm not sure if
Oh, I see why. Because you cannot say anything true under the Anaxagoras, I think.
Right.
right. Well, I thought you were
Because-
saying you can't say anything false either.
Well, in note 462 on page 357, Reeves does make the point that Heraclitus's argument makes everything true, but it also makes everything false. So there's a symmetry in the Heraclitus side. I'm just looking at the non-symmetry in the Anaxagoras side. Because we're on the assumption that the principle included middle does not hold, so we're somewhere in the middle. We're in this middle ground that's neither true nor false.
Mm-hmm.
So to say that A that is neither B nor not B. So we're saying, because the thing that's what the asymmetry is. We're trying to say that A is B. That's why we have an asymmetry. So you can neither say that is true nor false. You can neither say that it is not A nor not A. Sorry, not B nor not B. So you can't say anything true about it. I'm sorry.
So for Heraclitus, right? Every pair of contradictories is true of everything. For Anaxagoras, it's the opposite. They're not true of anything. To even really talk about them, you do have to at some point leave them.
I figured it out. There's two ways of being wrong and only one way of being right.
Okay, cool.
You can I can say A is, I can say something A is not B. I can say A is not B in two ways. I can say A is A, that's saying A is not B. I can say A is this excluded middle thing. That's the two ways it's saying it. But there's only one way of saying A is A. I think that's where the asymmetry comes in. There are more ways of failing than there are ways of being true.
Right.
Because we have that excluded middle option open to us under the assumption that excluded middle is false. Whereas in normal case, we have the binary and then the symmetry is, but with three objects, you have the possibility for asymmetry. True, not true, and neither true nor not true. And both of those are not true.
Awesome. Thanks for struggling with that.
I had it all figured out, except that I went to sleep a couple of days ago and forgot it.
All right. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to look over this conversation and when we get the recording, because I want to get some of my own thoughts a little bit clearer on this. Okay, so in gamma 8, let me see. Let's scroll down, right? Okay, so I want to hit this further paragraph and just, I think this is something that everybody should be cognizant about in their own speech about anything, is whether their speech blows itself up or not, or dissolves itself, destroys itself. And Aristotle puts his finger on that in this paragraph. So let's read it and talk about it. And if there's any way to relate it to what's come before, great. And if we can't, that's cool. We'll move on. Wait, did I skip it? Did I skip something about the unmoved mover? Does that come later? Okay, never mind. Let's read this first. Okay, he says, and he's working out the point that he made earlier that we've been discussing. Further, if it is necessary that everything be either affirmed or denied, like the definition of truth he gave us, it is impossible for both to be false, since it is one part of the contradiction that is false. Indeed, the often expressed objection to all such statements clearly follows, namely, that they do away with themselves. For anyone who says that everything is true also makes the contrary of his own statement true. And so his own is not true, for the contrary statement denies that it is true. Blew itself up. Whereas anyone who says that everything is false makes his own statement false as well. But if each makes an exception of these cases, the former saying that the contrary of his statement is alone not true, the latter that his own is alone not false, it follows nonetheless that each must assume an unlimited number of statements to be true or false. For the one that says that the true statement is true, and this will go on without limit. Who gets the blowing up your own statement idea out of this and wants to try to state it? There's two ways to blow up your own statements or your own assertions about things.
I'm joining Michael in a half hour of silence. Unless my willpower only lasts about 10 seconds.
Okay.
Nobody else speaks.
Uh-huh. Okay, so I'm just going to reread the salient. The very first sentence is a little bit difficult, and I don't know if I'm clear about it. So if any of you are, I'd appreciate hearing from you. But I'll come back to it. It says, but after that, it says, for anyone who says that everything is true also makes the contrary of his own statement true. Stop right there. Why is that? Like if I make the claim,
Well,
the stars move, and I have the theory of truth that every statement is true, what follows?
The stars don't move.
Exactly.
my only thing that I'm unclear about is why you use contrary rather than contradictory there.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't tried to be too terminological with these, and maybe that's a failing, but I have a feeling that he often uses them as synonyms.
Because I guess I'm rather a strict interpretationist. Contraries and contradictories are different things. And he does make a big hash of that in other places. So for him to slip up here seems odd, but.
I mean, it could be a quirk of translation, maybe, but I'm assuming.
And I also think the translator's pretty decent on those things.
That's true, yeah.
It's not like he's never had logic before.
Well, there is a note that I started thinking about, but it got in the way of my thinking about other things today that's pertinent to this. And that's the difference between something being not equal and something not being equal. And the one is contradictory opposite, and the other is a contrary opposite. And the difference is one has an underlying subject and the other doesn't.
Exactly. Contraries have an underlying subject, contradictories don't.
Right. Okay. So let's like construe an example where we have an underlying subject here to see.
A white and colored thing, you know.
Whoa. Wait a second. Does that mean all statements are treated as underlying substance in some sense?
Not statements themselves.
Okay, never mind.
I'm not sure statements have a nature.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so either, but there's a strange sense in which for a statement to carry falsehood or truth, right?
Well, but he does talk about that. Truth is either say what is, and say what is not.
Mm-hmm.
That's the definition of true. So the true and the false seem to have this contradictory thing going on. There's no middle between them. There's no possible middle.
Right.
But leaving aside, I mean, to get to the point of the main part of this thing, leaving aside the subtlety of the contradictory or contrary, everything who says something is, someone who says that everything is true, I mean, everything is true. So the contradictory of his statement is true. And also, I guess the contrary of his statement would be true as well, since everything is true.
Right.
So I guess saying that everything is true sweeps up contraries and contradictories and non sequiturs all in one big lump and makes them also true.
Yeah,
that's
good. That's true.
Okay. All right. So.
Although I don't know what the Greek for non sequitur is.
Me neither. All right. So. Who says everything is true? The one who denies the principle of non-contradiction. And in doing so, not only is my statement about something true, but when somebody says the opposite, that is true as well. And if the opposite of what I say is true, then what I say must be false. So in saying the true, I say the false. Okay. My statement has blown itself up. I wanted to assert something. I wanted to say that the stars are moving, right? But the stars are moving means the stars aren't moving. If everything is true, because the contrary or contradictory statement would be true as well, right? And at that point, we're back at this problem of, Heraclitus and Parmenides, that everything becomes one and everything is everything. And if everything's already everything, nothing can take on a new form because it's already everything, and there's no change possible. All right. And the second option here, anyone who says that everything is false or every statement is false makes his own statement false as well. That should be a little bit clearer.
Yeah, that one seems pretty easy.
Yeah, you have to take a, if you say everything's true, right? Everybody's got their own truth. Everything's true. I mean, this is, this is something he brought up when he was talking about Protagoras, and things are as they seem to be. And therefore, if I think that honey is sweet and you think that honey is bitter, then honey is sweet and bitter at the same time, and it is a contradiction. So with the whole truth thing, you got to have to make an additional step. Everything's true. Oh, I got to think now past that. That means that the opposite of what I say is true too. And if the opposite of what I say is true, then what I say must be false. So what I say is true and false, and what you say is true and false, and what everybody says is true and false, and everything's a contradiction. And we're back at this. We're back at the problem that if that is so, change is not.
The only problem with that argument is if you're actually arguing against somebody who holds these positions, you can't use any logic, which gets back to Aristotle's point is like, you can't argue against these people. All you can do is wait for them to make the mistake of saying something definite, and then you've got them.
Exactly. Exactly. And since you brought it up, and that was one of the study questions, does anybody want to rehearse that thought, that idea that
Got a hand up.
Okay. Yeah, thank Richard.
Well, maybe not to the study questions, but I guess that's like still in this paragraph.
Yeah.
Like it seems like you can end up in either like, basically an endless circle or some kind of infinite regression.
Yep.
Right. Like it reminds me like, I don't know if anyone else has this experience, like, as a school child, like, someone gives you the piece of paper, says like, the statement on the other side of this paper is false. And then on the other side, it says like the statement on this other side of the paper is true, or you keep flipping it round and round and round.
Yeah.
But you only go around in circles if you actually believe in the principle of non-contradiction, et cetera. Those who don't believe in have no problem with that paper. That's the
Good point. Good point. Yeah, that kind of gets to this whole liar's paradox, and that opens up a whole different can of worms.
Well, he does kind of bring that in. Aristotle brings that in, or something similar, right? So he says, if each makes an exception of these cases, right, to rule out their own statement, the problem is that a statement about their statement would be either true or false.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, I think that's where it moves into the infinite regress.
Right.
But again, only those who have rationality will find an infinite regress.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I think, we're moving on time. I would kind of like to clarify that first sentence because it's not clear in my mind, but unless somebody has something that they want to say about it.
Which is the first sentence you're talking about?
The first sentence I read. Further, if it is necessary that everything be either affirmed or denied, it is impossible for both to be false, since it is one part of the contradiction that is false.
Right. I mean, if you're rational, i.e., you think that either something is true or false, it is impossible for both of the contraries or contradictories to be false.
Oh, is that it?
I think so, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's I think you're right. But the idea is if everything is either affirmed or denied, we've opened up our.
Oh,
opposition.
sorry, I took that wrong. You're right. I got that completely wrong.
Right, we got this opposition, right? So on the one side, the affirmation, the other side, the denial, and it is impossible for both to be false since it is one part of the contradiction that is false, right? So if my affirmation is Socrates is an Athenian, then the denial of that is already false. And since the denial of the true is the false, the denial of the false is not also false, but is true. I think that's the basic idea behind this. And both can't be false because the opposite of the false is the true. The opposite of the false isn't the false.
This is one time where I think quantifiers might help. Because it's one of those things for all x that exista, or does it exista for all x?
That might help you.
Well, if for all x, it is necessary that x either be affirmed or x either be not denied.
Mm-hmm.
I had it just a second here.
Are we getting into set theory now, or?
I think it's just
Oh,
predicate logic.
I've already been there, but I mean, Aristotle hadn't caught up with me yet. But so I was trying to scroll your page up, but it didn't work. So I'll go to my physical page.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go up?
I was trying to figure out what it says. Further is for both being what? I'm sure that's, I think there's this context, like, are we in the context of somebody who's denying that? Or are we in the context of a normal person? Or I'm kind of missing the context where both comes up.
I'm thinking the affirmation and denial is the both.
Right.
Yeah, but under the context of PEM or the context of not PEM?
I don't know. I think he is stating his own position here. Like, given the absurdities that follow from denying the principle of excluded middle, right? Here's how it is, folks. If it's necessary that everything be either affirmed or denied, then the affirmation and the denial cannot both be false.
Right. I think he introduces that in the previous paragraph. Against all such statements, however, we, Aristotle and all the right thinking people, must assume blah, blah, blah. Right. So I think it's still under that rubric.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the sense I get as well. We switched into Aristotle mode.
Yeah.
And haven't left it yet.
Okay, cool. Then let's move on to epsilon. A very short book, and repeats some of the stuff that we've already looked at.
Well, somebody has to make a calculus joke about delta and epsilon. That's just all I'm saying. For every epsilon,
it won't be
that's such that
it won't be me.
What is calculus?
It's getting very close to delta.
All right. You're the only calculus aficionado here, obviously.
I'm sure Clark and probably Tom, Richard, I mean.
All right. All right. So what do we want to, let me see. Oh, I have no notes on epsilon 1. So just going to wing it. So what's interesting, the first thing that's interesting here is that this book Epsilon seems to be in some tension to book Gamma. In book Gamma, Aristotle proclaimed that there is a science of being qua being, and he showed that such a science is going to be a science of substance. And substance we've thus far known as individual living things, basically, or self-moving things. This horse, this man. And so it seemed that substance proliferates into this, all these individual active things. And here, he seems to go in a different direction, and maybe he does go in a different direction. That there's been a long controversy at this, because here he affirms that fundamentally the science of being qua being isn't just about all these individual moving things. It is ultimately about divine beings. And so metaphysics is necessarily oriented towards, or is culminates in a theology. And that's quite different than thinking about metaphysics as trying to help us understand this man and this horse. So one of the things is kind of understand a little bit about, why this, first of all, is it a change? Second of all, is there any other textual reasons for why this change? And this book Epsilon proceeds by thinking about the different kinds of sciences there are. Gamma said, every science cuts out a part of being, and that part is what it studies. And that part is a genus. And now we're talking about all sorts of different sciences and what actually falls under what he calls, right, the episteme theoreticos, right, the theoretical science, theoretical knowledge. And so let's just read a little bit about what he has to say about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about why theology must be the most estimable part of metaphysics. And in order to, and then hopefully we'll have time to talk about coincidentals, because they're obviously incredibly important to Aristotle. And yeah, anyway. Okay. So he makes several nice points in here in Epsilon 1. One of them is, there's no demonstration of substance, nor of the what it is or the essence, but there is some other way of making it clear what these things, what the nature of these things are. But you can't demonstrate them from higher principles, because they are the science of the highest principles, and there's no higher principle from which you could derive them. So it's a nice point he makes in the very first paragraph here. But I did want to just kind of go to the second paragraph and see if you understand pretty well how he distinguishes between the three fundamental sciences: theoretical, practical, and poetic or productive. But since natural science too is a science concerned with a particular genus of being, for it is concerned with a sort of substance in which the starting point of movement and of rest is internal to itself, it is clear that it is neither a practical science nor a productive one. Let me repeat. The starting point of movement and rest is internal to itself. What's the itself? The sort of substance, a sort of substance in which the starting point of movement and rest is internal to itself. For that reason, it's neither practical nor productive. 4, in the case of producible things, the starting point is in the producer, not in the produced, whether this is understanding or craft or some capacity. Whereas in the case of things doable in action, it is in the doer, namely deliberate choice. For what is doable in action and what is deliberately choosable are the same. And so if all thought is either practical or productive or theoretical, natural science would have to be some sort of theoretical science. But a theoretical science that is concerned with such beings as is capable of being moved and with a substance that in accord with its account holds for the most part only, not always, because it is not separable. So we have three sciences. I'm just going to leave it to you to explain to me what their differences are.
And the last time he did this, the difference of those three sciences is in terms of the movable, immovable versus the separable and inseparable distinction. But this, so here we have I guess a different slice on that. But we still end up with three.
Right. Yeah, but the movable and immovable and separable and inseparable, that all pertained to theoretical science, didn't it? I think so.
No, I mean, because first science was, because it would have been first science, natural science, and mathematics. Yeah, you're right.
Right.
So you're right. Good point.
Okay, awesome. It's nice to make one of those once in a while. All right, so I mean, this is one of those topoi, one of those classical places where Aristotle makes a distinction that is going to last till today. And even though the way we think about these things is different, nevertheless, he laid the groundwork for thinking about the fact that not every science is the same kind of science. And so not every science can have the same methods. And not every science can think about its object in the same way. And not every science is mathematizable, for instance. So it's interesting to think about what his grounds are for making this distinction. So what's the difference between the theoretical science and the producible or the productive science, poiesis, the poetic science?
Self-referentiality and self-moving and recursion or self-reference.
Okay, what is that? That's good. It's highfalutin.
I spent an extra $1 on that idea.
All right. So in what way is the productive science not the science of self-reflexive things?
Because the form comes from the craftsman, which
Right.
imposes the form onto the artifact.
Right.
Whereas in like natural things that have a movement, or the form comes from within, as it were.
Right. So the artifact doesn't move itself, and yet the artifact comes about and is moved by another. So the first thing to notice is that he's making a distinction between things that have that have a principle of motion and rest in themselves, and things that do not. Right? In which case, that they rest and that they move is determined by something other than itself. So there's two different ways for that to obtain. One is the case of the productive science, right? So the statue doesn't build itself. That's the basic idea. And the statue doesn't come about by the motion of the sun and the stars and the sand and the rain, right? It has a very specific starting point, a very specific principle, right? And that is the understanding or the craft of the producer. So the producer is what accounts for the artifact. And the science of production is the science of making. The science of the theoretical science is not the science of making. All right. But neither is the practical science the science of making. And this might be a little bit more subtle to get at the distinction between the productive science, the science of making, and the science of doing. Doing is not making. Practice and what falls under practical science are ethics and politics, among other things. These are not making. The science of politics is not the science of how to build a state. Right? The science of ethics is not the science of how to build a community. So let's see if he gives us any, or if you see anything in the text that helps you make the distinction between doing and making.
I mean, it would be the last line, right?
Maybe. I don't know. What do you make of it?
A theoretical science that is concerned with such being as is capable of being moved and with the substance that in accord with its account holds for the most part only because it is not separable. So the substance isn't separable from the being that's capable of being moved.
Right. But that pertains to theoretical science, and that gets us closer to the understanding what a what theoretical science actually studies, or what's theoretical knowledge, what's it knowledge of. But I was actually asking if you see anything in here that's helpful for distinguishing between making and doing.
Yeah, so making makes something outside of the maker.
Mm-hmm.
Doing does not.
Mm-hmm.
So an action, right? In action, you are not. Action has this. I don't know how to say this exactly, but it has that internal characteristic where you do not leave what you are in acting.
Mm.
And you do not make something occur outside yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, but in the case of producing, right, the whole point is to do exactly that, to make something outside yourself.
Okay. I mean, isn't a good deed something outside myself? And that's, I mean, I don't make a good deed, but I can do one.
I would say no to that. But
Okay. And why?
well, because the deed can have an effect outside you in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
but the doing of the deed is wholly internal.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I mean that's good, and that gets us at something we've talked just a very tiny little bit about, but and not enough. But we will talk more about it when we hit the substance books. Right, the difference between kinesis and agaya, the difference between motion that stops when the goal of the motion is complete, and motion that that is always complete at every moment of its exercise, and therefore can stop at any time without ever being incomplete.
We talked about that somewhere. I don't remember where.
Wittgenstein.
Was it Wittgenstein?
Yeah, we talked about. Yeah, I always thought that you know, because he says, you know, that he says something like, I want to be able to, or the goal of philosophy is to be able to stop whenever you want.
Oh,
Am I just missing like the more obvious point and jumping into?
sure. Why not?
Okay.
What more obvious point?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, right. No. Okay, no. Actually, I'm bringing in something here. So something here to help explain it, right? Because what he says is, as usual, somewhat mysterious, right? In the case of things doable in action, it is in the doer, namely deliberate choice, that is the starting point. And that sounds kind of like production, right? With the craftsman, it's the
Oh
understanding.
no, well, with the
Okay.
craftsman, right? They have to have a material to work with.
Yeah, but he doesn't mention that, right?
Okay.
So what is doable in action and what is this is, I think, the point. What is doable in action and what is deliberately choosable are the same. All right. And that's very mysterious. But what's producible and what is intended to be produced are not the same. They're different.
Right. Yeah, I can see the asymmetry there. Like a plant, right, produces other plants.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't choose to do this.
Right.
Well, it's not choice, though. I mean, well,
but both of them choose. But I think just to dumb this down a little bit, just for the sake of a clean distinction, is that the production is always the manufacturing of something external, like to use Tyler's words, right? And the doing it isn't.
One thing lingers after the doing.
Yeah.
One thing is only in the doing.
Right. Exactly.
Right. What is produced stays, but I mean, it lingers beyond the doer. So yeah, it's outside the doer at a certain.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The starting point is in the doer for
Right.
production, in a sense.
So I do because the doing itself is good. Right? And in doing, I act. And there is no product of that in which the act of being good, or the act of choosing a good, would come to an end. To do your duty is something that never comes to an end, and it's something you're always doing. And it's not like, okay, well, I've done my duty, so now I don't have to be moral anymore.
This part is just hard to talk about without just sort of sounding insane.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm overdoing it, but this whole idea that action doesn't have action is motion that doesn't have a product outside of it. Production is action that has a product outside of it. And what's studied in theoretical knowledge are beings whose actions are internal to themselves rather than outside. Okay, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page with that. It's very hard to explain it without.
Right. No.
Yeah.
And the ethics, he makes this much clearer. But this is what we have to go on. This is fundamentally something he works out more in more detail in the ethics. But I just wanted to rehearse it. I think everybody's heard, pieces of this. What's the difference between poiesis and praxis? What's the difference between poiesis and theoria? And this is just an opportunity for us to marinate in that question a little bit. All right.
Should we be in the fridge if we're marinating?
Not everything has to marinate in the fridge. All right, let me see. Since time is as usual running out, we should do these things for 4 hours like some Toronto groups. So I wanted to talk about snub, but we've already talked about snub in other sessions. So
the snub needs a nose. The concave doesn't need anything.
Right. And then he ends that paragraph, with an interesting reference to the soul. So given that the theoretical scientist studies some things that do not move and some things that do move, and therefore some things that are like the concave that have properties that don't change, and things like the snub that have properties that are exposed to change, and so forth, therefore have to account for matter, and therefore have to account for the different kind of precision that science is capable of, because it's dealing not with things that are always, or usually not with things that are always, but only things that are for the most part. And we remember that the always and the most part, these regularities and these eternal necessities are always an indicator of a final cause. Okay, when we talk about the causes, we talk about the regularities, and the regularity is always the sign that a final cause is necessary for the explanation of such phenomena. All right, and it says, and it's also clear why it belongs to the natural scientist to get a theoretical grasp even on some of the soul, that is, on as much of it as is not without matter. So the soul is enmattered, but it's not just matter, and that's why the soul belongs to the science of physics. it's of course been cast out of ours, but it's very, very interesting that of all the different sciences that Aristotle recognizes that the soul is going to be the kind of thing that the physicist would study. All right, then let's start on this next one. Any remarks? I don't want to run people over.
Yeah, I mean, physics is clearly understood and defined differently by Aristotle. It might be worth remarking on that a little bit. I would think it's going to have to do with moving things, and ensouled things are moving.
Mm-hmm.
So in virtue of that, you can see why he would say that the natural scientist has to have a theoretical grasp on some of the soul.
Right.
But then there's also the concern for for things which have a nature which has to do with things which have the principle of movement within them. So it's still about movement, but there's a lot you could add.
No, awesome, thank you. I mean, what's nice, one interesting thing about this Aristotelian construction is it's actually impossible to do a reduction to physics, a reduction of everything in physics in Aristotle, because of the way in which physics relates to that which is completely immovable. It for instance, mathematics, physics relies on mathematics, so physics can't be the science of mathematics, and it can't be the basis of a science of life either, because there's an aspect of life that always escapes it, that which is not, and that which doesn't change, that which is maintained as identical through all the changes of the life process. So the Greeks are going to get at that, what doesn't change, with concepts like form, energeia, and telechia. And anyway, it's just interesting that this kind of contemporary reduction of all things to science, or that to physics, or that physics is the base science that all sciences are parts of, that actually almost reproduces Aristotle's metaphysics. He says that the science of being qua being contains the being part of all sciences. And today we say, well, it's not metaphysics that does that. It's actually theoretical physics is the science with the broadest scope, and no science could be a science that contradicts any of the findings of theoretical physics. So we find the same structure of enclosure. For Aristotle, it's in being qua being, or being. All the sciences are parts of being. And for us, it's the same idea that all sciences are ultimately embraced or enclosed by the limits of theoretical physics, and any transgression of theoretical physics is ipso facto not about anything anymore. It becomes spooky, or it becomes pseudoscience or something. So that's not knocking. I'm not knocking modern science here. I'm just pointing to the identical structure, even though the entities within that structure are different.
Yeah, it is interesting that there are attempts to do a science of what moves, abstracted completely from a science of moving.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So that's just a throwaway remark, but
okay. All right. Now I have to make a choice. So we're gonna, the whole thing about divine beings is kind of interesting, but it doesn't give us very much to go on, and it gives a lot to go on in coincidentals, but the coincidentals will probably take us too long. So we'll just read a little bit of Epsilon 1. And before everybody leaves, I am going to, over the holiday break, I'm going to make about a half hour, 40-minute Zoom video that is going to summarize as many of the basic points of this course that this past year as possible to do in that span of time, and I'll make it available to everybody, and then it's something you can look at if you have time to just kind of refresh. What is it? This whole thing that we've been doing, and in that presentation, I will explain how to make sense of the beginning of E3. I'm just going to read the beginning of E3 just to remind you of how odd it is. Here, let me scroll down to it. It's kind of cheating because we haven't actually talked very much about coincidentals today, and it's a continuation of the coincidental. It takes forever. There we go. It is evident that there are starting points and causes that can come to be and pass away without going through a process of coming to be and passing away, since otherwise everything will be of necessity. If whatever is coming to be and passing away must have something that is non-coincidentally its cause. Will this be or won't it? It will if this comes to be, but if not, it won't. And this will if something else does. And in this way, it is clear that since time is always being subtracted from a limited period of time, we will come to the present moment. So what most threw me was this idea of starting points and causes that can come to be and passing away without going through a process of coming to be and passing away. I mean, what the heck does that mean? So I have my thoughts about that I think help. Does
it mean that they're persistent or always there, those causes?
No, they're instantaneous.
That sounds like bad calculus physics or something.
Right. So, well, okay, it's ridiculous to lance into this without saying something about it. So,
you mean instantaneous or atemporal?
Let me show you. I'll let you decide that after I explicate this. Right. So, if we think about the example of somebody eating something spicy, right? This person will die by violence if he goes out, and he will do this if he gets thirsty, and he gets thirsty of something else. And this way we shall come to what belongs to him now, or to something that has come about. For example, if he gets thirsty, and he does so if he's eating something spicy. And this attribute either belongs to him or it does not. And so of necessity, he will die, or of necessity, he will not die. All right, so I ran across this great example, and I thought it was very interesting. Now, the eating of spicy food is not the cause of this person's dying. And this example I read, I thought was very illuminating. And that is, it's not just because of eating something spicy that you die. Eating something spicy does not either always or for the most part kill you. So it is not a proper cause. It's not explanatory of your dying. And yet it's somehow involved. It's involved coincidentally. And one way to, and the question is, what kind of involvement is this? And the example I ran across is this. A person who dies a violent death must be the sort of being that can die a violent death. It must be possible for that being to die a violent death. Now, being the kind of being that can die a violent death does not mean that you are always going to die a violent death, nor for the most part that you're going to die a violent death. All right. But if you die a violent death, you're being able to die a violent death instantaneously in the moment of your death becomes an accidental cause of your death. Because without it, you wouldn't have died a violent death. So here we see that it's a cause, but it's only a cause, not because it leads to the violent death, but because the violent death is not explainable without it. So I think Peter and Tyler use the term condition a lot from Gerson. I think that this is, one way to think about the conditions of an event happening are all of these accidental or incidental causes that are only causes if the event transpires. And they're not causes, they're instantaneously causes. They don't come to be, they don't produce, they don't come to be the cause of something unless it happens. And then retroactively they're causes, and they're retroactively at that instant. And therefore there are starting points and causes that can come to be and passing away without going through a process of coming to be and passing away. My violent death brought about instantaneously.
It seems sort of like the actualization of a potential cause or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. And I didn't think about that. And it makes sense in the whole Aristotelian scheme of things. So I appreciate your bringing that up. But and I think, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And maybe this will help us understand activity and capacity when we get to it in the next section. But this is just like one of those weird spotlights on how Aristotle uses the term cause. And the cause is not something that happens, at least not always. It's not something that brings something else into movement the way we think of it. It is that which is necessary to include in an explanation of why something happened. And something can only be moved to die if certain conditions are obtained. Like, for instance, it must be capable of a violent death, and many, many others as well. And these are causes, but they're only causes retroactively. It should remind some of you of Lacan. Retroactive causes.
So you need both the conditions that make the possibility actual, and you need the being which has that possibility in a certain relation.
Right.
The cause part of it is the necessary thing. The condition is the accidental part, kind of like.
Yeah, but the point is Aristotle calls them both causes, and so we just don't want to stumble over that, right? Because they're explanatory. Because cause is aetion, right? Blamable, right? And the bullet only killed me by penetrating my brain because that's the kind of thing that can kill me. Because I am such as to be killed by that kind of event. It's not the bullet alone. It needs to be predisposition, which is why something can't die that never lived.
So you're a bullet enabler is what you're saying.
Exactly.
So the only real cause of anything then is Canada.
It sounds like everything is true. You've gone Heraclitean on us. Is there something about Canada that's enabler?
No, he did. He went South Park on us. Bravo, Tyler.
It's a famous song in a cartoon. Blame Canada.
Yeah.
Because only the blamable.
Okay.
That was a good text, Ty. I enjoyed it. I knew it.
Awesome. So hopefully that will, when you go back over epsilon and think about what he's getting at with these coincidental causes, right? And coincidental causes always have this, we're dealing with substance and accident. And we're only explaining things if we get to intrinsic causes, and therefore getting actually at the identity of things. And if we flounder about in the limitless realm of the coincidental, right? All we're getting at are conditions of the possibility. It's just and they're literally limitless. We're not. So if we reduce things to pure contingency in this way, there is nothing left to explain. And so that's why this, getting back at this whole thing we started with, substance, accidents, the asymmetry of the account transfers, and the kind of causality that is possible for properties or accident or non-intrinsic properties or accidents and how unexplanatory they are because they're not related to the identity of the thing. This, you know, he's fleshing out this fundamental framework and trying to show that this framework is not optional. It's not optional for thinking about things, and it's not optional for the things that are thought about. But those two sides meet in this ground framework that is the, you know, the substance, accidents, universal, particular quadrant that we started off with. And so anyway, that's the main point I wanted to make today. And I'm done with my presentation. And I'm open to, I'll be here for a little bit longer. If anybody wants to talk about anything in the text that we had to jump over because of time reasons, but I want to do justice to your labors. And if anybody wants to take off because they've had enough Aristotle for 2021, I totally get it. I am up to here kind of as well. And I'm looking forward to a little break so I can return refreshed for sections of the substance books. Probably, so this is the deal for those who are also in Schmidt. I'm going to start Schmidt earlier because it wears me down less. So look for Schmidt to begin again mid to end of January, and then probably around sometime in February we'll get started again with Aristotle. Give you a good breather. You can go back and look at some of the texts to see if they, you know, the things that boggled your mind at the beginning, whether they start speaking to you more. And I totally encourage that keeping Aristotle warm somehow in your mind.
So are you saying you won't be having another meeting till January?
Well, we are meeting next week, but you know, the every other week thing we've got going is 1 week, like today we did all of Aristotle, or did nothing but text reading of Aristotle. Next week we're going to read a section of the Arbogast-Schmidt book, Platonism and Modernity and Platonism.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Sorry,
then,
I didn't mean to make you tell me. I could probably just look it up on the meetup. And
oh, no, that's all good. No, but it's good to be clear. So we are having the Schmidt group next week. And then, you know, there's always the so-called Aristotle free-for-all. So we can bring up points from this text or from Aristotle more generally that you want clarification on. That's a good time to do it. Or we can just or we can just keep talking about Schmidt depending on people's interest. But then after next week, we're taking a break, and I'll start up with Schmidt in mid to end. Yeah, look for it. You'll get the announcement probably mid-January, and then Aristotle I'll kick in again in February. Awesome. Any last words to Aristotle in 2021?
Well, Michael, I just want to say that just because the rest of us aren't silent doesn't mean, I'll speak for myself, that it wasn't tremendously productive today. And I also really want to thank Peter and Tyler for wrestling with the material for us as our stand-ins. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. And just to let you know, it's totally cool if you don't want to say anything. I actually don't mind. But I just want to create spaces for people in case you want to say something. Because you can tell I can run right over people's silences. All right, then. Thank you very much, everybody. Good conversation, and this is one of those ones that the contributions are so good. I definitely need to go back and review sections of it. So that was awesome. Thank you very much for all your help. Hopefully I'll see you next Thursday. Otherwise, we'll see you. And one more thing. So I'm not doing any more announcements of Aristotle categories, metaphysics, the soul. That won't be what's announced next year. Right? I'm going to break it down.